I've worked with teenage girls who were pressured into prostitution by their boyfriends who acted as their pimps, and I've also worked with sex workers who are basically boss ladies running their own business. And that is just the very tip of the iceberg on how complex the issue of prostitution is. Hi babes, I'm coming at you from Jamaica. I'm also using a different camera than I normally use, so sorry if the audio and video is like not the same as it usually is. My question for you is, should prostitution be a crime? That's a big, complicated question that is currently being debated around the world because Amnesty International put forth this proposal to say, hey, countries should decriminalize sex work. Basically what this means is that sex workers, aka prostitutes, won't be thrown in jail for it and they will have legal rights protecting them. I want to unpack the issue a little bit because it has been so controversial. I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. I'm not, but I do have some thoughts. Prostitution has been criminalized around the world, mostly because people think that's a naughty thing that people should not do, but also because they're worried about the spread of disease. The theory is that, hey, if we criminalize it, the sex trade will just disappear, right? Wrong. The sex trade is very much alive and thriving. Amnesty did a bunch of studies looking at prostitution all around the world and basically came to the conclusion that, look, criminalizing it is failing. It's not working, guys. It's creating more stigma and more discrimination against sex workers, which is making it really dangerous for them. In the US and UK, police raids have pushed sex workers underground into more unsafe areas. They've made it harder for sex workers to negotiate condom use, what their rules are, to turn down a client. Police often use condoms as evidence of the crime, so nobody wants to use condoms. And because it is a crime, sex workers are very reluctant to report abuses against them. When they are reported, police don't always investigate those abuses. In fact, the police themselves are sometimes the abuser. In various parts of the world, police have used a sex worker's lack of rights to extort money out of them, to extort sexual favors. I mean, after all, the sex workers are the criminals, right? And that's the ugly side of criminalization. It empowers abusers by limiting a sex worker's rights, making them more vulnerable. So Amnesty's like, hey, decriminalization could be a better direction to go with this issue. And then a bunch of scholars and feminists and celebrities wrote a letter that roundly rejected it. Like, hell no, Amnesty. They say that decriminalizing sex work wholesale only helps abusive pimps and johns because they can now call it business. Instead, we should criminalize people who are buying sex and provide lots of services and exit strategies to sex workers, usually women, who are trying to get out of the sex trade. Now, there's nothing wrong with services and exit strategies. The problem is that the letter sort of implies that sex workers are the same thing as trafficking victims. Those are two different issues. Really need to recognize the difference between sex work, which is consensual sex trade, and trafficking, which is not consensual. It is coercive, it is force. Conflating those two only creates more stigmas, it only makes things more dangerous. Now, of course, this is a tricky point, right? It's not always easy to tell who's being coerced and who's entering into it freely. In Amnesty's proposal, they wrote, "We recognize that intersectional discrimination and oppression can play a role in an individual's decision to engage or remain in sex work. Systems of oppression deny people power and lead to poverty and deprivation of opportunity. Women, people of color, and transgender folks are overrepresented in sex work for a reason. The problem is that we just re-marginalize people who have come to sex work when we deny them legal protections." All right, you still with me? You still following me here? Let's talk about punishing just the pimps and the johns. Could be good in theory, but it does make the patronizing assumption that we need to save sex workers that aren't being coerced. And perhaps more to the point, there's no strong evidence that this actually works. Sweden and Norway have this policy, and it's often seen as a success because street prostitution dropped off. However, the data started in 1999, right as the internet became a thing, and actually just a lot of sex trade went online. Reports by experts in Sweden say that however well-intentioned, this law has actually made it more dangerous for sex workers. It's pushed their transactions into the shadows in order to protect their clients, where it can be harder to tell if it's a safe or unsafe situation. Amnesty also noted in their report that Sweden's policy hasn't made clients any less abusive and that it may not work in less developed countries. There might be some way to modify Sweden's model to make it a little bit stronger, but it's definitely not there yet. New Zealand, as another example, decriminalized sex work in 2003. Since enacting that law, sex workers in New Zealand report that they're better able to negotiate condom usage, to enforce their rules, to turn down clients, to talk to healthcare workers. They sign contracts, they get paid weekly, they have typical labor protections that everyone else has. The UN also says that decriminalizing sex work globally would reduce HIV infections by anywhere between 33 to 46% in the next 10 years. That's a huge deal if we really are concerned about reducing disease. The retort to this is that decriminalization increases the demand to buy sex and also increases sex trafficking. But I actually couldn't find any hard data that backs this up. So I'm going to leave that as a big old question mark for now. There's so much to think about here, and this is such a hugely important issue. These are human rights we're talking about. These are women's rights we're talking about. We really need to be careful. We need to listen to what sex workers are saying. We need to look at the data and really come up with a complex, humanistic policies that will really address the core of these issues. I look forward to your thoughts in the comments down below. I'll probably hit you up from another country next time. Maybe not. Maybe I'll be home.